We'll just get started in 1 minute. Okay, we're ready to go. And so I will call the 18th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee to order. It is a virtual meeting during the COVID-19 emergency, and City Hall is open to the public with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can also be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. And I'll begin this meeting by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. And with that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Yes. Okay, I'm seeing none. So I'll go to the consent items. There are 4, and I'll check with committee to see if anybody would like to pull any of those consent items. Okay, do I have a motion to move the consent items? Moved by the mayor and seconded by Councillor Kayavaga. Any comments or questions or concerns? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to comment on 2.2, which is the 2019 minor variance applications considered by the Committee of Adjustments. It was an information report. It was such a good read. I want to thank staff for it. It is really good to know what happens sometimes when we send things out and what happens at Committee of Adjustments as well. And really appreciated getting the update and also looking at receiving the annual updates as well, in particular 2020 with COVID. So again, I just want to thank staff for the work and for the information. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just to tail off on Councillor Hopkins, I read the report, found it very thorough and very informative, so quite helpful, and I appreciate the work that went into that. It doesn't look like something that was produced very quickly. It looked like it took a lot of digging to find that information. I was wondering if I might, through you, Madam Chair, ask of Mr. Yeoman, is there any sense of the frequency by which the Committee of Adjustment diverges from the opinion or recommendation of staff?
Okay, Mr. Yeoman.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. So that's something that we don't formally track through our process. However, we did a bit of investigation into this. We found out that there are roughly 13 occasions that occurred last year, so about 10% of the applications that occurred. There is a deviation from the staff recommendation to what the committee actually does approve. So about 8 of those were recommendations for refusal that were granted by the committee. 3 of those then had a recommendation for approval that the committee refused. So it's discussions that occur as Committee of Adjustment as an adjudicating body based on the recommendations that are put to them, the opinion of the applicant, and also, of course, the public comments that they receive through the process.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Yeoman. Are there any themes of divergence that we should be live to, I guess, as the committee that delegates that responsibility to the Committee of Adjustment?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's an excellent question, and there's none that we're identifying for council at this time. If we do have matters, though, where we have concerns about significant policy matters that are addressed through the committee, where we may have a flag that needs to be followed through, either through an active action or through policy monitoring, we'll bring that to council's attention.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Yeoman.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to say on 2.1, which is the CIP review and some proposed targets, I want to thank staff for their work on this particular project. This is an extremely important incentive program for Old East Village. It has been quite successful up to this point. And I think taking a metric-based approach, taking a look at what has been the impact so far, what is the necessity of the program in the future, that is treating each of the areas, downtown and Old East, separately and having targets for each one, I think is very wise. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to reach the population targets for each area, but I do think it's possible that, given the way apartment building construction happens, that it will kind of go in leaps and bounds and then periods of slower. And I think having the program designed this way allows for that to happen and not have them tied together to be the exact same program, regardless of what's happening in the different areas of the city. So, I think getting some feedback from people on what's being proposed is appropriate. So I support the recommendation. I know there's a lot of interest in how this program is designed and how it runs over the next decade or so. I think it's going to be really important both for downtown and Old East. But I think this kind of review and these kind of recommendations are going in the right direction, which is sort of evidence-based, clear metrics about what are we trying to accomplish. And I think it's a very good start. I look forward to the feedback from the community on what they see in this report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and to that as well. I think one of the things that I really appreciate, and thanks for the Deputy Mayor for identifying the targets component, is tying those targets with the rate of the amount of the grant that would be associated with the development charge subsidy. And I think that's something that's been missing for me for probably the entirety of this of the DC grant program. It is being tied to a specific outcome or metric. And it just seemed to be something that we would have in perpetuum without having anything to kind of signal when we would kind of throttle back a little bit on that program, and how it could be tuned to adjust to accomplish our goals, especially with the downtown population. So this is a really helpful proposal, and I like seeing that come forward here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Oh, we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded, and I will call the vote on that.
Madam Chair, I vote yes.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Hopkins, please.
I vote yes. I did log in. I just don't see my vote come up. So I will wait for the next round. But I do vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Councillor, I don't want to be one of those techie people that ask you if your computer's plugged in, but just if you haven't tried it yet, try clicking on those 3 bars beside the word that says meeting and hit current item and see if that will help. And if you've already done that, I don't mean to be condescending or anything. I'll move to the scheduled items. Item 3.1 is a public participation meeting for an application at 16035 Robbins Hill Road. And this is a report prepared by Ms. Joanne Lee. I believe Mr. Adama is going to present the report on behalf of Ms. Lee. And I just want to ask committee members, when you're speaking to this report, if you have questions or for the planner, if you could state your name at the start of your comments, just for accessibility reasons. And I will ask for a mover to open the public participation meeting to begin with. Moved by Councillor Kayabagha, seconded by Councillor Turner, and I'll call the vote on that.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Go ahead, Mr. Adama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as you said, I'll be presenting this on behalf of Ms. Lee, but she will be, or she is on the call now and is available to answer questions that the committee may have through the chat. So this is an application for 16035 Robbins Hill Road. And the application is to add a waste transfer station to the list of permitted uses in the zoning bylaw, subject to site-specific limitations. These site-specific regulations will limit the scope of the use as compared to other waste transfer stations, so as to mitigate the potential impact on adjacent areas. The site-specific regulations that are proposed include limiting the use to the transfer of medical and pharmaceutical waste only, restricting the use to the existing building, restricting the use to a maximum gross floor area of 600 meters squared, and prohibiting any outdoor storage associated with this use. So the site has an area of just over 7 hectares or 18 acres and includes a number of recently developed industrial buildings. This application applies to the use of one of the existing buildings on the site and will not result in any new construction. The site is located within the industrial area adjacent to the London International Airport, just located to the northwest of the airport itself. And it's within the heavy industrial place type of the London Plan, the general industrial land use designation of the 1989 official plan, and is currently within a general industrial and heavy industrial zone. The proposed use includes a medical and pharmaceutical waste disposal facility that will be operated by ECS Cares Incorporated. It will receive and store medical and pharmaceutical waste within secured containers to be shipped to another site, and none of the waste will be processed within this facility. The use has been classified as a waste transfer station under the zoning bylaw, so an amendment is required to add that use to the subject site. The site-specific regulations are recommended to limit the type and scale of the waste transfer station that is recommended and has been requested by the applicant. In terms of planning consideration, the heavy industrial place type, as well as the general industrial land use designation, are intended to accommodate industrial uses that may impact other more sensitive land uses, such as in residential or other similar types of uses. And these more impactful industrial uses include such things as a waste transfer station. Because of their potential for impact on surrounding areas and the natural environment, waste transfer stations generally require a zoning bylaw amendment to allow for those impacts to be reviewed before the use will be permitted. In this instance, however, the scale and type of waste transfer station will not produce many of the typical impacts that we associate with that use. So therefore, in our opinion, given the heavy industrial place type, it is an appropriate use for the site. The site-specific regulations that are recommended to be placed on the use are necessary as they will permit this facility, but do not open the door to other waste transfer stations in the future that could produce more significant impacts on the surrounding area, which includes the London International Airport. The London Plan also includes that a waste transfer station will be subject to a holding zone until environmental compliance approval is received from the province. The environmental compliance approval process includes a detailed review of the operations of a waste transfer station to ensure that all provincial requirements are met. Including the holding zone allows council to consider any specific requirements of the environmental compliance approval before it allows final zoning approval. However, in this instance, given the limitations that are recommended to be placed on this waste transfer station through the site-specific zone, the risks and impacts that may be associated with a waste transfer station are not of concern. and therefore it's not recommended that a holding zone be applied. If council does wish to consider a holding zone, the H47 zone may be applied and can be removed upon the issuance of environmental compliance approval by the province. Again, though, it's not our recommendation that holding zone be applied. So in conclusion, the recommended amendment is consistent with the PPS. It conforms with the London Plan and the 1989 official plan, particularly policies related to the heavy industrial place type and the general industrial land use designation. The proposed waste transfer station is an appropriate use for the site, and the site-specific zoning regulations will ensure that there are no adverse impacts on adjacent land uses, including the London International Airport. And it is recommended that the requested zoning be approved to permit the waste transfer station subject to the site-specific restrictions that I have described. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions, or Ms. Lee can take them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adama, and thank you, Ms. Lee, for your report. Are there any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be a little weird one, but it references any impact on the airport operation. Is there any concern about the airport operations impact on the site? And I ask this specifically. There's no mention of federal regulations in this. It speaks to provincial regulations. I recall, and I don't know how accurate this is, a while back that the federal government had built a level 4 research facility for biohazardous materials in Mississauga, one that met that standard, and it was underneath a flight path and the approaches to Pearson. This site is directly at the end of the runway for the London Airport, and has biohazardous wastes and others that will be stored there. Is there any concerns about any impacts associated with, I don't know, an error in navigation, perhaps, of aircraft through this flight path?
Through the chair, and I'll respond, and if Ms. Lee has any additional comments, I'll let those come through the chat. But we did circulate the application to the airport. They reviewed it and didn't identify any concerns with the use, so long as those site-specific regulations were put in place. And their concerns were more with regard to potential impact on the airport. So a waste transfer station may produce odors, may attract birds, which obviously could be a concern for flight paths, as you mentioned. I'm not aware of national restrictions on uses such as this in proximity to the airport. Again, the airport didn't provide any comments to that effect. And I'm also not sure if the applicant is on the line who may have considered those sorts of requirements.
Through you, Madam Chair, the question is specifically, what if there was an accident at the airport and compromised the building itself? So recognizing this probably doesn't have any impact on the airport's operations, but the airport's operations could pose a risk associated with this to the general public environment if there was an accident at the airport at the end of the runway, especially if there was a fire at the end of the runway or a plane continued off the runway into this building. That would be a bit of a mess, I would think.
Through the chair, again, I haven't specifically considered that type of impact. I would just say that through the environmental compliance approval process, some of the specific operations may be considered, and I don't know if they would look at area impacts such as the airport, but again, through our review, that wasn't a specific item that we looked at.
Councillor?
I think I'll hold it for there. That was my technical question.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, so my technical question is regarding the shipment of the waste from the facility. I'm not sure if it would require ministry approval, but nothing is really mentioned how the waste would be removed. Is that a concern or a consideration through this zoning process?
Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, my understanding is that's an issue that will be covered and addressed through the environmental compliance approval process. Our review of the site included impacts on adjacent sites. So, and the nature of the facility is that materials will be delivered in secured containers and moved, stored on site to be moved elsewhere, but there's no processing of any of the materials on site. So they will stay in those secured containers the whole time they are at the facility.
That's good, Councillor Hopkins, you're all good? Great. Did you have your hand up, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, physically and on the computer, I think, Chair. I just want to come back to, excuse me, Councillor Turner's comment, because I want to be sure we know what we're dealing with here. He and I have great confidence in his role with the health unit, and when he makes reference to biohazard, that kind of raises a question for me. And then I see reference to, in the detailed description of the operation, sharps disposal, pharmaceutical disposal, and it says no processing of liquid or hazardous materials. So do you deem any of this to be biohazard, is my question to you, to the staff.
Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, I'm not sure if it would be considered biohazard or not, or all of the specific materials that could be coming through this facility. My understanding, and I was satisfied based on the description of their operation, that materials would be delivered in containers to be delivered and processed off-site, so that none of that processing would occur within this facility.
So does that, so is the processing component, is that the point at which there's some concern about this being biohazardous? Because I did note that you said no processing would be on site.
Through the chair, if there were biohazardous materials, it's my understanding that's the point at which they would be exposed and removed from those sealed secured containers.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, Chair, how sharps disposal, needles and the like, and pharmaceutical disposal translate to biohazard. And I'm respectful of what can be in needles and what can be in pharmaceutical stuff, but I'm not sure that it rises to the level of biohazard. I'm just trying to understand that to help me along with this. I don't know if that's a rhetorical question.
I'm going to go to Councillor Turner. He's got his hand up.
Perhaps it's not for debate, just more, if I might add some clarity to it. Any medical instruments that have been in contact with somebody else with their blood or otherwise are deemed biohazardous waste until they're properly disposed of and incinerated. So anything that's, all the stuff that's identified here would be construed as biohazardous waste. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's actually a virus or something that poses risk, but that's not known until it's destroyed. So storage of it is biohazardous.
Okay. Any other questions or technical questions about this? Okay, seeing none, I wonder if the applicant is on the call, excuse me. I see the agent for the applicant in the committee room. If you would state your name, you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair Cassidy. My name is Laverne Kirkness of Kirkness Consulting and Strickbold and Ellie Engineering, and I'm representing Dancor Construction Limited. And Madam Chair and committee members, thanks very much. I have Sean Ford, President of Dancor Construction with me, and he would like to address the 2 points from Councillor Turner. And at least that point about bio-waste. I should say, though, that having made the application, written the planning justification report, tracking this, I have to appreciate the planning staff for kind of looking critically at their policies or constructively at their policies, and not just kind of throwing them at us, but looking at what we're doing in terms of the small scale nature, the absence of processing, and the small scale and the nature of the operation, so that we can get through this process, as well as respect the level of policy, as well as the ECA, which will eventually come, subject to the successful rezoning. So we appreciate that. We agree with the report. We agree with the restrictions that are placed on the operation, and would ask that Planning Committee look favorably upon this report and recommendation. But before I can say that, oh, and by the way, I think it was kind of covered in the Free Press fairly well as by Norm DeBono. But in any case, I'd like to bring Sean forward so he can address Councillor Turner's comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Sean Ford with Dancor. Just to address really one question, I believe Councillor Turner's addressed the issue of the biohazard. It is the contents of the needles once they're collected, even though they're in a container that deems them a biohazard. We're not going to have our tenant dealing with anything other than that. In terms of the airport and their view on us and us on them, the building is illuminated. It's got red lights on the roof. It is built at a certain level to avoid any flight path issues. The operation is using a small truck, 30 feet in length, to be able to pick up what most of you would know as the yellow needle containers, as well as delivering new needles as they make their rounds. That 30-foot truck comes back to our building. The contents are in a container. They're palletized. They're brought into the building. They are then put on a 54-foot trailer, and that 54-foot trailer is taken away whenever it's full, twice a week, once a week, and it's brought to another location where everything inside is destroyed. And it's near the city of Barrie where that destruction operation happens. So I hope I've addressed those two comments. If there's anything else, I'm happy to address them now as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I'll open it up. Well, I'll check with committee. Do you have any additional technical questions before I move to the general public? Seeing none, I will invite any members of the public who would like to address the committee on this application to come forward. And I'm looking at committee rooms 1 and 2 and committee room 5. No? Again, one more call. Any members of the public who would like to address the committee about the application on Robbins Hill Road? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote.
I vote yes, Madam Chair. My voting system is not working.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so any debate or discussion on this application from committee or a motion? Councillor Turner. You're moving? Sorry, go ahead.
Takes a second to hit the button. Thank you, and I appreciate the answers to my questions. Whenever we're developing and proposing alternate uses adjacent to large transportation sites, and you've heard me bring this up before whenever we're developing alongside railway tracks. The railway tracks have a specific setback distance, I believe, of 30 meters. There are setback distances associated with airports as well. And with the airports, it's typically associated with the potential impacts on the site, and sometimes the impacts on the air, or often the impacts on the airport. And when we talk about railways, we look at them, one from noise and vibration effects, but also from the emergency preparedness standpoint of what would happen if a train derailed, especially with the materials that trains carry. In general, around the airport, it makes sense that we have easy access to the airport, so things can be moved in and out of the city with ease. The location of this site specifically is pretty much directly at the end of runway 09 and 27. And if it's not unprecedented that planes carry off the end of the runway, especially in adverse weather. I mean, while those are pretty rare events, we have to contemplate what would be hit if a plane continued off the runway and into that building. The nature of this material isn't one that creates a lot of concern for me. It's just something and I think it can be mitigated through an appropriate hazard plan through the fire department and appropriate our emergency management folks. I think though that when we look at applications like this, especially adjacent to large hazard areas like this, that needs to be a component in the report, and it needs to be contemplated so that we consider whether the rezoning is appropriate to allow for those hazardous materials, which could be then liberated from the site if there was a crash. In this case, probably limited to a distribution of a whole bunch of needles through the area if there was a large explosion or something to that extent. But if it poses risk to the environment, if it poses risk to the responders, if it poses risk otherwise, then those are things that need to be contemplated. I'm generally comfortable with this, but I think there are questions that need to be asked. So I'm not going to, can't contemplate an alternate other than that holding provision. But I don't see how that holding provision would specifically apply to this. And the ECA probably contemplates those things, but I think it needs to be identified for good measure so that it's front of mind for us. Well, not only us, but staff as well, and the applicant in their planning as they move forward with the application.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other discussion? I'm seeing none. Do I have a motion? The mayor, I believe, would be moving the staff recommendation. Is there a second? Oh, are you kidding me? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. I'll ask one more time if there are any other questions or concerns about this application, and I will call the vote.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Hopkins, please.
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, I'll move to item 3.2, which is a public participation meeting regarding the new proposed City of London tree protection bylaw. Can I have a motion to open the PPM? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call the vote.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and I will go to Ms. Spence for an introduction of this item.
Through the chair, Good afternoon. We are here today to introduce the proposed new City of London tree protection bylaw. This process has been ongoing since about 2018, and this report specifically focuses on the comments received at the public participation meeting held last year on September 23rd, 2019. The changes to the bylaw has provided for more process certainty, understanding, and better outcomes in its future administration. The main change we have made in this report is to the tree protection area maps, which can be found as Schedule B in the bylaw. A detailed mapping exercise was undertaken to examine all tree protection areas. We have added several parcels that resembled woodlands and also adjusted existing canopy cover lines and areas of tree growth. Approximately 2/3 of the original total tree protection area is proposed to be removed. This is a little alarming, but this is mainly due to removing tree protection areas that had already been exempt through the bylaw. Examples of this include city parks, hydro corridors, municipal drains, and ponds. We also heard concerns that the tree protection areas in residential backyards created potential for infractions of the bylaw through normal maintenance activities such as lawn mowing. These specific residential parcels were reviewed, and in some cases, the TPA or the tree protection areas were removed. However, we'd just like to bring to your attention that distinctive trees will still be protected, which are 50 centimeters or greater at breast height inside the urban growth boundary. Also, as previously brought forward, we are recommending that cemeteries and golf courses are exempt from the bylaw and that the size of the distinctive tree remain the same and not lowered. We're asked frequently if the bylaw is working. Based on the information available, we estimate the bylaw has preserved an average of 25 hectares of tree canopy cover every year since 2016. This may be achieved directly through denials of permit or indirectly through tree care industry advising owners that their tree would not likely get a permit. The tree protection bylaw is a very important component of the urban forest strategy to reach our goal of 34% canopy cover by 2065. A recent tree canopy cover analysis that was completed last year has shown an increase in canopy cover from 23.7% to 26.8%, an increase of 3.1% in approximately the same 4-year period. If approved, the new bylaw would come into effect on March 1st, 2021, providing opportunity to educate the public about the new process and forms. Sarah Rolland, Urban Forestry Planner, is also here, and together we welcome your comments or questions.
Thank you, Ms. Spence. Any technical questions from committee? Okay, seeing none, I'll open it up to the public. Invite you to come to the microphone in whichever committee room you are in. I'll acknowledge, because sometimes I see 2 committee rooms and 2 people at the same time, so I'll acknowledge what room I'm looking at, and then you'll be invited to state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee. So I'm seeing activity in committee room 1 and 2, but then that activity stopped. There we go. Come, sir, to the microphone, state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, my name's Paul Marsh. I own a small tree company called Woodland Services. It is an incorporated business. I operate it with my son. I really set it up for him. He's not part of the ownership because the incorporation goes back. That's another story. But why I'm here, first, I want to wish everybody in the committee, a wonderful afternoon and day. I appreciate the time to speak. I also want to say thank you to Gillian Spence and all the people in her department. My son and I have been working with them for 4 years, and we strongly believe in increasing the tree canopy in London. In fact, to date, we started off as a part-time business. We've planted more trees than we've actually removed. And that is our mandate as a company. We'd rather plant and preserve than remove. But we do removals, and distinctive trees are probably about 10 to 20% of our target market and our revenue stream. My problem is this, I believe in this sincerely, but I believe the council also needs to represent small business. We're essentially a small company. We're growing. We're trying to employ a few other people. There's a lot of tree companies in this area. There's a lot of fly-by-night companies in this area, which this actually does speak to, but it's not part of this bylaw. My personal opinion, a bylaw about the fly-by-night businesses is probably more important than this next step. I wasn't able to attend the meeting last year. I didn't actually know about it, but that's on me. That's my problem. So I wasn't there, so I'm probably late to the game. My issue is this. My son is, in my opinion, and I've been told by others, a very good arborist, to use the term. He's a great tree climber. He loves to protect and plant trees. However, he does have some college courses. He actually has a little bit of a learning anxiety when it comes to writing tests. So he's been in this business almost 10 years. And he was taken a little bit advantage of by another company, which I won't go into detail. So I said, why don't we buy some equipment? And we started a small business. And I've invested a reasonable amount, which will pass on to him. I'm not necessarily a tree guy, but hey, without trees and worms, we're all dead. So I am a tree guy. So, but having said that, my son is not a certified arborist. He has some college, up to 10 years experience. We've worked to this bylaw since 2016. We have turned down trees where homeowners wanted them removed and we knew they were distinctive. We've walked away from those jobs. So basically my issue is this. There's a definition of a qualified arborist. My son meets most of it. But the minute you have to write the ISA exam, which I suspect he's going to have a little trouble with. So it sounds like it's all about me. It's all about us. To me, it's not. I've been in the business world for a long time. It's about small businesses and being successful, the ability to be successful. So we've abided by all the rules, but this is going to take us out of about 10 to 20% of our market unless he passes that exam or unless I hire a contractor, which I've done. But my point is this, I'm fully in favor of increasing the tree canopy. I'm fully in favor of the bylaw originally, which allowed us to put in permits to the city, and we have. And I've actually been told some of our permits are well written. So, but having said that, that's all matter of opinion. But if we were able to do it for the last 4 years, there should be some sort of grandfather clause in this so that we can proceed. Otherwise, you know, it might sound like it's all about me. It's really not. It's about the trees. But we follow the rules, but it's my son and I that will lose if this goes through exactly the way it is. He needs to be grandfathered. And you know what? He's going to study and he's going to try and write this test. But it's not about just woodland services. There are a lot of tree companies in London, and a lot of them are fly-by-night, and they hurt the industry. And they need to be taken out. So that bylaw needs to pass, but we've done all the right things, focusing on the bylaw itself. We're incorporated. We're fully insured. I pay in the WSIB, which it's talked about in here. And for the record, what I was told by WSIB is we actually don't need to pay into it because it's a very dangerous job. So, so that's something that needs to be looked into, but we've done all of that.
You have 15 seconds, sir.
Good, because I'm done. We've done all of that. I just believe this bylaw has to be able to grandfather certain companies in. If we're legitimate business, we should be in. That's my point. Thank you very much for the time.
Perfect. Bang on 5 minutes. Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? Welcome. State your name and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Richard Zolinka, and I actually spoke on a couple of occasions. Once when the first tree protection bylaw was coming to this committee, and again in September at the public meeting regarding the bylaw review. First of all, I would like to commend Ms. Spence, Sarah Rowland, and their team on the review process that they did conduct. In my opinion, it was a very honest and objective review of the bylaw with a professional focus on what the bylaw is supposed to do. The bylaw is not supposed to be an existing or future parks plan or a trails plan or an open space acquisition plan. It's not to be a future forestation plan. And yet the current tree protection bylaw tries to be all of these things and more. And in doing so, it abuses and confuses the intent and purpose of a tree protection bylaw. So the recommendations that you see before you tonight, I would say seek to redirect the bylaw to its intended purpose. And for that, I'm very pleased at this report and recommendation. The review also takes a pragmatic approach towards making the bylaw more workable and understandable, and also fairer to the public, to the landowners who have trees or who have been stewards of trees. For example, the proposed removing of the tree protection areas from manicured backyards of private homes, and the reforming of the fee schedule. These proposed changes start to move away from the approach of penalizing landowners, property owners, homeowners who plant trees, who care for their trees and on their property. So these changes are helping to move away from that approach and providing a fairer approach to tree protection. On a specific matter, though, I did want to mention that I continue to be concerned about one aspect of the bylaw, in that it contains no provision for the city engineer to deem existing succession plantings to meet the requirement for replacement trees when a distinctive tree is removed. So the example I gave the committee in September is I have been planting successional plantings, trees under the canopy of a distinctive tree for years to have them ready to take over if in future the distinctive tree needs to be removed. And yet, under the bylaw, I would be required to either pay for replacement trees or to pay the city to have replacement trees put someplace else, even though I've spent thousands of dollars on these trees already. So I would ask that there be some ability for the city engineer to deem replacement trees to have been met by existing successional plantings. The recommendations for Schedule B maps, I think, are one of the major improvements in the bylaw. They bring logic and understandable purpose to the bylaw, and I commend those changes to the maps. There is a recommendation in the text of the report that is for updating and revising the maps every 4 to 5 years. I would suggest, since that normally isn't a matter of public notice, that there be something on the city's website where we could contain a statement to the effect of, these maps are updated every 4 to 5 years. Please report any errors or inconsistencies to, and leave a contact there, so that the public can help to identify these things in the period between updates to ensure that errors and inconsistencies are identified. I do want to overall state that the recommendations are positive, they're appropriate, and they're welcome. I'm very pleased with the work that the staff has done on this bylaw.
You're just past 5 minutes, Mr. Zelinka.
Okay, I'll leave it there then. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Oh, all right. Well, if you didn't recognize me from my brief maskless stint, I'm Dean Shepard. I'm Executive Director for Reforest London. Reforest London feels that the tree protection bylaw should be making some incremental steps towards enhanced protection. There's a lot of positive changes in this bylaw, but what it's not doing is making some extra protective advances. And in fact, you could argue that some of these changes are actually rolling back protections a little bit. And we would like to see it go in the other direction. A fundamental plank of the city's urban forest management strategy is that larger trees provide more benefits, and we should be striving to grow and protect those largest trees in our city. Leaving the threshold at only 50 centimeters protects only 6% of our existing trees. Think how precious the big trees in our city are if only 6% of them are bigger than 50. Reforest London is asking that the protection be expanded to include trees that are 40 centimeters or more. I know this came up at a previous public meeting, and I know that staff are not recommending this, but this is a very reasonable step forward. It would offer protection to now 11% of our urban forest. So it's not an aggressive protective measure by any means. Many Ontario municipalities already have bylaws that protect trees of 40 centimeters, including Brantford, Guelph, Kingston, Mississauga, Richmond Hill, Vaughan, Toronto, even Hamilton. 7 out of 8 of those places actually have thresholds less than 40. So London, the forest city, is lagging all of these communities. Tree protection in these communities is stronger than it is in London. It's stronger than even what we're asking for tonight at 40. The rationale provided for not protecting more trees is not in the importance of the task, but rather the demand on staff time. And it's understandable that resources are constrained. But here's the rub. Monies for additional tree protections need to be approved in the city budget process. And I can't see a way personally that a business case is going to make it to council's consideration for additional staff member to protect more trees without the bylaw to justify that ask already being in place. So with no bylaw change because of no budget, and no budget because of no bylaw change, it's a catch-22 with no progress. We're stuck. We need to break the logjam. And to me, in my opinion, the opportunity is in front of us tonight. It's at the bylaw stage where we can make that progress. So we're asking you to enhance tree protections in this bylaw and task staff on to figure out how to deliver it. Even if the increase in protection is small, I'll hope that the planning committee will direct staff to take even tiny steps in the right direction. No amount of new planting is ever going to overcome if we're losing our very biggest trees. You can imagine how many, literally thousands of small trees it might take to produce the same ecological benefit and human benefit as big trees do. We know that trees help us in many other areas that are priorities for council. That includes climate change, healthy communities, and quality of life, which we need to keep recognizing is also an economic driver. We have a long way to go to reach our canopy and healthy forest targets. No progress in tree protections should not be an option. Sitting still should not be an option for us. Climate change and quality of life in the forest city require us to take constant steps of improvement. So Reforest London is asking the committee tonight to endorse changing the level of protection for distinctive trees from 50 centimeters to 40 centimeters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepard. Any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? Welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Skylar Frank. I'm the Executive Director at the London Environmental Network. And I just would like to make a few comments regarding the new proposed tree protection bylaw. As you can assume, I will probably echo some similar sentiments to what Dean just said, but I do have 2 specific ones I want to cover. As Dean said, here is an opportunity for council to take action on climate change tonight. ahead of the finalization of the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which will be done sometime next year. So by supporting and enforcing tree protections in London, Council and committee will be showing that they are moving forward on climate action efforts. Maintaining the tree protection bylaw at 50 centimeters of breast height runs the risk of having anything lower than that unprotected and removed. And we'd recommend moving the number down to 40 centimeters and hiring the necessary staff in order to be able to monitor and enforce those protections. We do need climate action right now, and staff are saying through this report that they would need more staff to adequately protect those trees. They put together a very nice chart that I quite liked that showed, in fact, if we wanted to be able to monitor 100% of the trees in London, it would require an additional 18 bylaw officers, which is also curiously the same number as the ones that would be required to monitor all the parking spaces downtown that just recently got approved. So council has demonstrated in the past that if there is a need to hire more bylaw officers, there is a possibility of that happening. So I'd love to see it move down to 40 centimeters and the additional bylaw officers be hired. That would also help with London's recovery process in that there'd be more staff working in the green sector and new jobs being created. Also, as a separate aside, on Appendix A, page 98 of the amalgamated agenda regarding tree replacement, it lists the quantity of replacement trees to be planted, but no reference size. So for example, a mature silver maple could be replaced with like 4 very small seedlings under 1 foot tall. And there's no mention of how large those trees have to be that would be replaced. So it would be good if there was a minimum size, not only a minimum number of trees to be replaced, but also a minimum size for those trees. Just because trees act as carbon sinks, and as you know, we need as many trees in the ground as possible, soaking up all of our carbon. So thank you for your time, and have a good night.
Thank you, Ms. Frank. The mic is open. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? One more time, any other members of the public who would like to speak to the tree preservation bylaw? Okay, I'm not seeing any other interested parties come forward, so I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by the mayor and seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I will call the vote on that.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kayabaga.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, are there any questions, comments, discussion, debate? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thanks very much. Through the chair to city staff, how should we value the trees that have been preserved because of the tree protection bylaw? I know in the past we had an approach which was to look at the diameter of the tree and the height to establish a kind of value for its ecological function. I know we didn't end up adopting that approach in the tree protection bylaw, but I wonder if we should, if you give me some kind of a rule of thumb for a tree that is at least 50 centimeters in diameter, because 2,000 trees is quite a lot, and those are very large trees. I know they're not all 50 centimeters, some of them are larger than that. But if we had a floor, I think it'd give us a sense of what kind of value is being retained through the tree protection bylaw.
Ms. Spence.
Yes, so through the chair, we several years ago actually did an iTree study, which describes the function and structure of the urban forest and puts a dollar value on it. At that time, our urban forest was valued at 1.5 billion. and that it provides $17 million per year in ecosystem goods and services. So it's annual services that it provides are for carbon stored, removal of air contaminants, and energy conservation. We did not do that study recently. We did do the canopy cover analysis, which is one measure of how your urban forest strategy is performing. So as previously was mentioned, larger trees have larger benefits exponentially. It can take quite a few years for a tree to, if we're removing a 50 centimeter DBH tree, that 4 or 5 replacement trees could take decades for it to reach the same values that it's providing our communities. So currently we are looking at a replacement tree replacement based on DBH, which is a little bit different and not necessarily a compensation value.
Deputy Mayor?
Appreciate the answer. I guess what I'm really looking for is something like, a tree that size is worth at least $4,000.
Okay.
So if there's some kind of range that we could be working on, I don't know what the answer is. I think it's probably somewhere in that neighborhood, depending on the tree. But I have a sense of what the overall urban forest is valued at, and certainly 6% of that is something like $90 million. But we're not talking about protecting all of that through the permit system. It's just a fraction of those things. So I'm trying to get a sense of those 2,000 trees, which is our sort of best estimate of how many have been retained because of the tree protection bylaw, what the value of that is. And if you have some kind of floor that would be reasonable for a 50 centimeter or bigger diameter tree, I think that would help inform, we're looking at, should we spend more money to protect more trees? And the answer may be very obvious. If it's, should we spend $100,000 to save $8 or $9 million in trees, right? And I just wonder if you have some sense of what a floor might be for a 50 centimeter diameter tree.
Ms. Spence.
Yes, through the chair, I'll try better. So the cost appraisal for a tree is determined by health and condition, by location. There's several factors that that when input into this equation can provide us with a replacement cost. So the majority or a lot of the trees that we are approving for removal are dead, dying, diseased, damaged. So we're not requiring tree replacements or application fees for those types of trees. But for the trees that we are preserving, we've done some analysis, and it's not, because trees are so varied, the sizes are varied, but we've done a couple items where we've looked at the average size of tree that we've preserved is around 70 centimeters. And if around a 70 centimeter tree that's healthy, that is a native tree, it's like a white oak, values for those types of trees could be up to over $100,000 as a replacement cost. So trees as an asset are one of the only assets that appreciate over time in value. So those are, if you're looking at just the number seems small, like, oh, you've protected 2,000 trees, but in actuality, those are 2,000 trees that are very large, providing a lot of benefits, and replacement costs could be in the hundreds of thousands.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question through you to staff. I represent a ward that's urban, rural, and I know that the urban growth boundary was taken into consideration with this tree bylaw. My question is, given that we're not looking at a large area, but why did we not take into account the city limits? Why was just the urban growth boundary looked at for this bylaw?
Ms. Spence.
Thank you. I may defer that to Ms. Rolland.
Ms. Rolland.
Thank you. Through the chair, the decision to limit the tree protection area within the urban growth boundary came about in 2016, and it was really led by an analysis of availability of staff to cover a geographic area with a lot of tree conflicts, if you want to call it that, areas where we would expect to see a lot of permit applications. The rural areas, and I'm speaking very generally now, they experience a different kind of approach to management in that they're very much led by rural practices. Things like normal farm practices do occur. There is also resource extraction from quarries and such like. Those are both exempted under the Municipal Act and cannot be prohibited by the bylaw. You will see often that trees are removed to expand field boundaries for farming, to allow for larger machinery and those sorts of activities to occur. So the decision was made not to extend the distinctive trees citywide, although it was definitely considered. At the time, in 2016, it was under consideration as a proxy for heritage trees. So by protecting large trees across the whole city, we would effectively protect trees of some heritage value. But as I say, the decision to limit it within the urban growth boundary was done really to ensure that staff could apply themselves effectively to a smaller area where we were expecting to see greater conflict under the bylaw, while allowing those exempted activities to continue as they will anyway in the rural areas. So it came down to staff resources, really. If we did remove the urban growth boundary limit as it stands today, and distinctive trees were captured throughout the whole of the city, inevitably we will get calls. Every time trees are removed, we do get, well, not every time, but a lot of the time, we do get calls about the activities that are going on in the rural areas. And we are unable to enforce it. However, we may have to go out there and verify what they're doing to know whether or not it's an exempt activity. So probably we will end up doing more enforcement work in rural areas rather than permit work in rural areas. And that said, a large part of my particular workload is focused in the rural areas because that's where the woodlots are that are parts of the tree protection areas. So I do still attend to those for permit applications to do harvesting, sustainable harvesting. So as I say, the decision was made as a resource-based decision, but there is certainly, there was definitely discussion back in 2016 about heritage trees and the desire to ensure that heritage trees, wherever they are, could be protected. But as I say, that decision within the rural areas fell with the development of the urban growth boundary to contain the distinctive trees.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just trying to form my thoughts, so it might be a little still abstract, but I remember right when our first kick at the can at this, we had a long debate about the tree diameter preservation, and we ultimately adopted a caliper diameter that was much smaller than what was recommended by staff. We took a look at what was being done in other municipalities and tried to benchmark ourselves against there. So the submission from Mr. Shepherd is helpful and interesting to know that there's that many municipalities that go beyond what our caliper diameter is. Also last term, we put a fairly significant amount of resources into the tree preservation, both with staffing through the planning staff and through engineering, to be able to help support the activities of the tree preservation bylaws, and as well for plantings too. One of the things I I'm happy to see, and it's noted in the report that it could either be a methodology change, but it's probably also as a result of an actual increase in canopy, kind of stemming from the works of both agencies like Reforest London, the Trees and Forest Advisory Committee, Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and the efforts of the city. I mean, all of those together, I think have done quite a bit of work in turning our attention to how trees are treated within the municipality. I'm interested in the idea of reducing the caliper requirement for increasing protection and moving that towards 40. But I think that the challenge is, and Mr. Shepherd identified it quite well, is this bit of a paradox between the budget and the bylaw, and our ability to enforce a bylaw that we change would be difficult without having a supported budget ask to go with that. And our supported budget ask would be really difficult to have without having some impetus within the bylaw. But typically, these would come forward as business cases through the budget, and we would have to weigh those against the other things. And it's hard for us to kind of get ahead of that through the bylaw itself. And my concern would be having something on the books that we weren't able to enforce, which would ultimately undermine the bylaw to a bit of a greater extent. I was intrigued to hear comments from Mr. Zelinka, who I remember last pass was quite critical of this bylaw. So it's helpful to hear that this has addressed some of those concerns. And I think the modifications, as I read through them, seem to have contemplated the stakeholders' concerns and issues quite well. I think there's the way it's written actually does a good job of identifying the issue and saying, if we do this, then it might do this, and this is how we're going to address that. And that kind of gave me reassurance, especially in the areas where they identified a reduction in the tree protection areas, which still sits with me with a little bit of unease. But the rationale seems to make sense. I'm not quite sure how that ends up manifesting. Back to the caliper width. I mean, while it identifies the proportion of the trees that meet those definitions, it doesn't necessarily mean that the remainder are trees that are at risk because they will be removed. It's a theoretical risk. That said, many are removed as a result because they do skirt in underneath that diameter. At this point, I think for us to have gone from having no bylaw to a bylaw, the big keys in policy for us to be able to do tree preservation on the larger scale is things like the woodlot protection bylaw, which is a massive piece of policy that helps us retain woodlots in their size, rather than looking at the individual trees. Then we have the tree protection bylaw in this case, which speaks specifically to private trees throughout the community. And then we also have the boulevard trees. So when we layer these three things together, I think it creates a good framework for tree protection within the city. Is it absolutely ideal? No, I think there's quite a bit of work that we can do. At this point, I would rather ask for a business case to come forward on seeing what the tree preservation at 40 centimeters would look like, rather than us passing it in the bylaw at this point. And that's tough for me because having formerly been on the board of Reforest London and EPAC and ACE and Urban League and all of those things, I want to see us have a really robust framework for tree protection. I'd like to see our bylaws have the chance to work, I think in a functional fashion before we start to increase the limits a little bit. But I do think, as Mr. Shepherd identified, we do need to continuously push it a little bit more at each successive pass. And I don't know, perhaps through you, Madam Chair, what would be the cycle for review for this bylaw in the future. And we bring it forward at this point. Is there another point that it would come back for us to take another look at in the future?
Ms. Rollins, I think you can answer that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think we would welcome any formal decision by this committee to bring it back on a regular basis for a review. I would propose that that be at not less than 5-yearly intervals, and perhaps no more than 10 or 15 to remain current with what's going on in our afforestation efforts. And I would leave it there, but certainly I think there is every possibility that we could bring the bylaw back. It's just a matter of fitting it into your busy schedules.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you, Ms. Rowland. And I think that's what I would look towards, is having this, having a review cycle for this bylaw that was associated with the tree protection targets and the canopy targets that that the cities met. Because I think if we were to see that the efforts within the bylaw weren't accomplishing what our objectives were, then we would want to be more assertive in applying the bylaw. So we'd need to have that on a frequency that we could actually note that. I mean, if we waited 10 years and the canopy decreased by 15%, then we'd be way behind the game. If it was 5 years and we took a look and said, wait a second, we've lost about 2-3% in the canopy, then we need to be more assertive and aggressive with our policies to be able to move forward in that. I don't know probably the best way to get that other than to make an amendment to that, but the bylaw is already written here, which might complicate things. Usually Deputy Mayor Helmer is often pretty good at coming up with the logistics of that. Perhaps through you, Madam Chair, if there might be some way of doing that staff might be able to accomplish, I'm not sure.
Okay, the city clerk is going to weigh in here. Through Madam Chair, based on discussion, it appears that you would like to pass the bylaw as is stated in the report, and the B part would be to submit a business case based on a 40-centimeter diameter, and then C would be to direct the civic administration to report back within 5 years, sooner if needed, something to that effect. That's what I wrote down. I'm just trying to be helpful.
Yeah, and perhaps, Madam Chair, it doesn't actually need to be written into the bylaw. I think that's probably a useful recommendation, is that council directs staff to review and bring forward a report on the effectiveness of the bylaw within 5 years' time, or a period not exceeding 5 years.
So, Councillor, did you want the B in there as well, which is that staff come back with a business case for reducing the size of distinctive tree?
I would put that forward. Yeah, I think the prospects are slim to moderate that it moves forward, but I think it would be important for us to have that context and know what the impact of that would be.
All right, so that's a motion moved by Councillor Turner. Is there any discussion, debate, or a second? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I think a business case wouldn't hurt. I really do agree with much of what Councillor Turner spoke to. One of the things that we heard loud and clear through the public participation process was to enhance protections to reduce the diameter would really make a difference. And I can't ignore that. I'm sort of, but I can also understand that by putting it in the bylaw right now, it may be premature because we don't have the support. So getting information to understand exactly what that could be, I don't see any harm in doing that, getting that information and taking that and seeing where that goes, to, I could go either way, even with a report back. 5 years, anything can happen in 5 years. It seems like a very long period of time. Supporting a business case right now, getting the information, heck, we just got 13 bylaw officers, and I think if we're going to look at the effectiveness of this bylaw, looking at the dimensions, it doesn't hurt to get that information, and that's what the business case would present. So I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I will not be supporting it. And here's why. I think we've had some really helpful discussion around this, and the comments about this being, could it be one way or the other, feels premature to me. And yes, we could put more tasks on staff, and I respectfully submit that while we're doing all of that, we're going through a pandemic. And it won't be an excuse, but I think it's a very real situation. Whereas I think there's an orderly process that staff have made a thoughtful recommendation. It feels reasonable, and I got a sense that we could all probably live with that as a reasonableness check, knowing that we'd come back and check with staff from time to time as is appropriate, and at the right time, perhaps request that business case. But I'm not there today, Chair, and so I will respectfully not support the enhanced recommendation as suggested.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. As we all know, the budget is going to be tabled tomorrow at SPBC. And so I do think it is a bit late to be coming up with a business case ideas to be considered in the budget because we just don't really have a lot of time. We're going to be getting the budget tomorrow, and we're deliberating on it not that soon after, and we'll be having to make decisions about a variety of things. So I say that just because of the situation we're in. I do think, though, that the kind of resource allocation we're talking about is perhaps not necessary to have a business case. We actually spend a fair amount of money on urban forestry. We have a number of very smart staff who are on the call here. And I think perhaps if we were to ask a question like, is there a way to accomplish some of this resource reallocation within our existing budgets? Look at what could we do? Can we add one FTE in this particular area because we're a little bit under somewhere else? Is there some way of accomplishing part of what needs to happen now, and then we could have maybe a business case into the next year's budget update because there's a council direction to bring it down to 40? Because I think that paying to plant new trees is an expensive undertaking, and if it is a lot more cost effective to protect existing trees, I would prefer that, both from an environmental perspective but also from a budget perspective. If it only costs, say, $110,000 to protect an additional 2,000 trees, that's pretty cheap, right? That's cheaper than, and those are big trees. Those are not the small trees that are getting planted now. So I think we have to look at it through both those lenses, what's going to be good for the environment, but also what's going to be good for the city budget. And if we see more value in the protection approach than even planting, I would even be in favor of pulling back on some of the planting activity to free up resources to do more protection. Because I think if that 2,000 number is accurate, and it seems like a reasonable estimate based on what we can see happening over the first few years, that's a really good return on expenditure. So perhaps maybe, I don't know if Mr. Parsons, I see him on the call, or Ms. Scher want to weigh in about what kind of room there might be within the overall budget for urban forestry, if there's any ability to accommodate one extra FTE in this area or two, or whether we would need a business case to deal with those kind of resource allocations, because I think we're kind of assuming that we need that, and potentially we could do some of it now and the rest next year.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Scher or Mr. Parsons, whoever would like to address that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can start and maybe Mr. Parsons can weigh in. We would have to go back and take a look at the budgets we have available, as well as the sustainability of those budgets over the course of the multi-year approval. We had not done that analysis to reallocate from capital planting to tree protection. So unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question at this point.
Thank you. And I don't want to presuppose what could happen in a budget discussion, but there's a lot of different options, which is, might be able to draw down some kind of one-time source to create some room before we can get to the point where we have time to deliberate on a business case that's fully fleshed out. And in the meantime, we could lower it to 40 and finance it on a limited basis. So there's, I think, options there. What I take away from this report is the tree protection bylaw is working pretty well. And I know there was a lot of skepticism when it came in. Is it going to really help to protect trees and retain them? And certainly the most valuable approach is the one that retains the trees we've already got for as long as possible. And I'm really encouraged by what I see in the report. I am interested in taking it down to 40. Toronto, the threshold is 30 centimeters. It's quite substantially lower than what we have here in London. And, I think we really need to spend our money as wisely as possible when it comes to the urban forest strategy. And if protecting is the best return on investment, then I think we need to really carefully consider that. And I think in this report, we're seeing really encouraging signs. I like the idea of going down to 40. I think passing the bylaw without having the resource issue sorted out is not really a wise approach. So what I think I would propose now is we could pass the bylaw as it is now. We can thrash things out in the budget around what are we going to do around the urban forestry budget. We may even have an update maybe by council from staff about what might be possible. We can see what the budget actually looks like. And then if we make those budget adjustments, we certainly have enough in this report to show us why it might be a good idea. Then we can revisit the bylaw and change it. Because I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. We could have an amendment to take it from 50 to 40 once the resource issue is sorted.
Ms. Scher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, we can endeavor to provide some additional information by the time this report comes to council. I would caution that we would not want to look for one-time funding to solve this situation. These are hirings, and it's going to be necessary to hire people on a permanent basis. So we would have to make the decision to permanently reallocate funding from planting to an operational enforcement role. But we will do our best to come up with a bit more information in advance of council, and certainly we can have that information for a report back at a future date as well.
Okay. Are you finished, Deputy Mayor? Yeah.
I am.
Okay. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Perhaps to be sensitive to the comments that have been made by my colleagues, and I think it's quite appropriate. I mean, we are looking at the tabling, or at least the preliminary discussion about the budget tomorrow, and we are in the middle of COVID, so unknowing what the full impacts will be and how we're going to navigate through that. I think it might be appropriate to make this recommendation now because it's a discussion now. To ask for a business case to be brought forward for the 2022 budget, which would allow staff to be able to spend some time taking a look at what the impacts are. If the discussion that was just had identifies staff's opportunities to say, as the Deputy Mayor suggested, are there abilities to move staff around, or are there requirements for hiring? How can we accomplish what other ways might we be able to move towards that 40 centimeter diameter? I think all of that gives some time and some space to be able to think about it, but also at the same time moves us on the path towards better preservation and allows that to be well-formed when it comes forward to debate for us. It gives us some space and time. And the second part of my recommendation, I think should hold. I'm not sure if the mayor would still have objection to that, but I think it is generally reasonable that in 5 years' time, this comes back for review to take a look at the efficacy of the policy.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm not sure if other people on screen noticed your assistant lean her head in. So if you would like to say hello to Claire from the rest of us, that would be great. And Mr. Mayor, you're up.
Thanks very much. I think there's some reasonableness to that, Councillor Turner.
So I have a question from the chair for, I'm not sure if it's for Ms. Rowland or for Ms. Scher, but way back when we first passed the first tree protection bylaw, there was quite a bit of discussion around the size of the, that would indicate a distinctive tree. And as Councillor Turner said, I think we brought it lower than what was being recommended at the time, but there even was a lot of debate at that time about going lower still. And recently, I believe it was last year, it might have been in 2018, there was an amendment made to the bylaw to allow for a third party or an arborist hired by, as was mentioned by one of the members of the public, Mr. Marsh, that there's a requirement for a certified arborist. It doesn't have to be the city arborist to do the inspection when the permit is applied for. And so a big part of the debate and the rationale for the distinctive tree size revolved around staff resources. And there was a concern from city staff that if we went too low, city staff would be overwhelmed and we didn't have the staff resources in place to do all of the inspections necessary. So that was the original. The amendment allowed for an arborist hired by the property owner rather than a city arborist having to go out and do the inspection. So I'm wondering how that has affected everything in current day. So city arborists do not have to go out and do these inspections. They accept the report that's been submitted by a certified arborist. So, you know, and how this relates to Councillor Turner's request for a business case to bring the size down, you know, have we seen a freeing up of city resources? Is there some ability, even as Deputy Mayor Helmer alluded to perhaps going ahead without a business case, given that we are accepting these reports from certified arborists that aren't city employed?
I think this is Jill Ann Spence. Through the chair, I'll, if Sarah wants to add on to my comment or response, she can. So yeah, one of the main goals of looking at the bylaw again was to make improvements to the process. What we heard from folks was that you know, the process was complicated, it was taking too long. And some of the issues that we were having as far as it was taking so long was that under the existing bylaw, there's under what's deemed a qualified professional, it basically says that anyone that's, I guess, approved by the city planner or city engineer at the time. So it didn't specifically define what qualification meant. So in the new bylaw, we have defined what the qualification means. It means an ISA certified arborist, a registered professional forester. And with those new ads, we're hoping that the going back and forth, a lot of that, I guess a lot of time on the application or the administration of the bylaw is because we're not getting the amount of information we need to make the determination if you know, the permit can be approved or not. So there is some, I guess, advantage to hoping that this streamlines the process, that there's less going back and forth. We have, you know, some opportunity to, with the dead distinctive tree permit, that we're requesting that it is submitted by an arborist, and that not every one of these types of permits would have to have a city staff go out and look at the site. So that would be a little bit of, you know, freeing up staff resources there. We will still be, you know, more or less doing, quality inspections of going out and looking at it, some of these dead distinctive permit applications just to see how they're working. But I just want to make it clear that the city staff are not going out on site making the determination whether a tree should be removed or not. We are verifying the information on the application. So if an applicant is providing us information that a tree is dangerous, that it needs to be removed, then we would look to their certified arborist to provide the evidence of that.
Thank you. So, Councillor, I understand you've amended your motion to be A, the staff recommendation, B, that staff come back with a business case reducing the diameter of a distinctive tree to 40 dBH, and that this be for the 2022 budget process. And C, there would be a review of this bylaw every 5 years. And it's been second, and the seconder's okay with that minor change? Okay. Any other debate? Any other discussion? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Madam Chair, I just want to thank the committee for the conversation and the discussion around the 40 centimeters. I think it's important looking at enhancing our tree canopy. And I really do think we need the information before we make decisions. And I understand the community's concerns that we've heard over and over again about the need to reduce and how we compare to other municipalities. I think this is the start, and I want to thank Councillor Turner for his motion as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Okay, I'll call the vote.
Vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor?
There may need to be some language adjustment. The phrasing around the diameter of the tree, I don't think is quite right, but I think we can fix it between now and council. I'm not going to hold things up.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I just want to say thank you to the members of the public that came out, and I just want to make a comment as well to our city staff regarding the concerns that were brought forward by Mr. Marsh. I don't know if you've been, I believe he said that he has worked with city staff, so I wonder if there's an opportunity for Mr. Marsh, his son, to connect with city staff at some point to see what, if anything, they can do to make sure that they're in compliance with the bylaw and that they can continue to do the work that they do, if that's possible. So I just want to throw that out there. I believe he said that he had been in contact throughout the process with members of city staff, so I encourage that dialogue to continue. And I'll move on to the next item. And we're into items for direction, and the first item there is the 7th report of the London Advisory Committee on Heritage. What we have there is the last, this is again about 183 and 197 Ann Street, and when that came to our committee last time, the motion that was made by committee gave a very specific date, and it turns out that that date is not when the planning application is going to come forward. After all, as you know, sometimes these things have hiccups, and so they require a pause. And so what staff are recommending is that there be reconsideration to change the date from November 30th to a future meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. Is there any questions or comments about that, this report from staff and the 7th report of the Land Advisory Committee on Heritage and the recommendation for reconsideration? I'm not seeing any discussion. Do I have somebody interested in moving that? The mayor, and seconded by the councillor? Sorry, Councillor Kayabaga. Deputy Mayor?
I support the reconsideration recommendation. Sometimes we put very specific language in resolutions and it comes back to bite us a little bit. And I think that's what's happened here, which is too bad. I've been trying to be better about not being overly specific, but I think I suggested this and I'll take responsibility for it.
So we have some added communications as well on our added agenda that are related to this item. And I think the way to handle those would be to refer those added communications to that future meeting as well. So we could handle that as like an A and a B. If that's what the committee wants to do, we could handle that way. Deputy Mayor.
I would prefer to just receive the communications now. I think it's a bit odd to put them off to something that could be many months in the future. I don't know when that's going to happen. People may have different opinions and want to write us again. So I think we should just receive the communications.
Thanks. Yes, Deputy Mayor, no problem. There was a little bit of a confusion here. We thought perhaps that they were delegation requests, and they're not. They're just communication. Okay, so well, there is a recommendation from city staff that this be reconsidered, and then we can also, as part of the motion, receive the communications. If that is good for the mover and the seconder, the mayor and Councillor Kayabaga, yes. Okay. So any other discussion or debate? No? Then I'll call that vote.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Won't let me see the button, so I'll have to vote by voice. I'm in favor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so we have another item on the added agenda, and it is the 8th report of the Lenin Advisory Committee on Heritage. It does contain an action item in here, and that is a request for designation of 75 Langarth Street East under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And then there are a number of properties that they want to add to the heritage listing. Not a designation at this point, just the listing of possible heritage properties. Mr. Mayor.
Just clarification, because you never want to miss it, but just want to clarify that the two properties that that we just dealt with in the last motion are not involved in this particular report?
That's correct.
I did go in alphabetical order and I didn't see it, and so I appreciate that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a mover to receive this report and also the request for designation of 75 Langarth Street East? Deputy Mayor? That's a motion and a comment?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Do you want to get a seconder first?
I have one, Councillor Hopkins.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, and thank you. Just in terms of the designation of 75 Langarth, we have a quite detailed statement from the Latch Stewardship Subcommittee, which I appreciate. I just wonder if our heritage planning staff have any comments about designation based on what they've seen at from Latch and in the committee discussion.
So I have Mr. Gagnon in the call. I wonder, Mr. Gagnon, if you'd like to comment?
Sure, thank you. And through the chair, I do have to offer a point of clarity. The research and evaluation that was undertaken for the property at 75 Langarth Street East was completed by a graduate student of the Western University Public History Program, Lorraine Tinsley. And so through her work, I was able to work with her quite closely to review the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value and the evaluation. And so an unusual process from our usual practice, but the Stewardship Subcommittee and the Latch were able to review her work and her recommendation, which staff were able to use the report to bring forward to the Latch formally and through to this committee. And I just also like to note that we were able to consult with the brother and sister of Greg Curnow, as well as the current property owner towards this designation. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I have Councillor Turner and then the mayor.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Gagnon. That's helpful. I think that was my first question was, are the residents aware of the application process? And the second was typically when we see a recommendation for designation, we see that compared against the criteria, the provincial criteria for designation. I mean, one of those is associated with persons of interest or historical value, and then there's also the architectural and the cultural context to it. Perhaps through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Gagnon, if he could just explain how that meets up against the designation criteria from the province.
Mr. Gagnon?
Thank you again, and through the chair. This property has met the criteria for designation in Ontario Regulation 906. This is probably being presented to you in maybe perhaps a different format, as often these situations arise related to a demolition request. However, the reporting process that we follow for a request from a property owner requesting designation, or these sort of situations, it's the recommendation from the Latch that just flows forward to this committee. So there was a detailed evaluation prepared, and it found that it met multiple criteria. So its associations with Greg Curnow as an important member of our artistic community, but also finding significant contributions of this property to the character of the Old South area. And also worth noting the contributions of William Porter, who was an important builder in the South London community, with quite a bit of research done into the different types of homes that he was building, as this home does fit into the architectural style of a Tudor revival in the mid-century period, revivals period, and it is underrepresented in terms of our existing heritage designated properties, particularly those pursuant to Part 4. So it does tick off many different of the criteria of Regulation 906.
Very good, thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much to Mr. Gagnon. You indicated that the owners at 75 Langarth have been consulted. Are they in favor?
Through the chair, thank you for asking that as a question. They are in support of the designation. We've been working quite closely in a very cooperative way and wanted to make sure that we were taking the time and effort to explain the responsibilities of designation. And we did have the opportunity to talk through the heritage attributes in particular that have been identified. It's worth pointing out that there are a few interior heritage attributes. And so there's a very clear understanding as to when and if heritage alteration permit approval would be required in the future for making any changes to those and specific areas of the properties where those approvals are not necessary. So for example, there's nothing in the kitchen that has been identified as a heritage attribute. However, the rear window has been identified as a heritage attribute as it was featured in a piece of art by Greg Curnow, The Backyard, 1972. Thank you.
So thank you. So Chair, through you, I understand that there are some financial implications associated with getting heritage designation, and at the same time, there may well be some residents who don't prefer such a designation. And so I guess I have a couple of questions here. What are the financial implications to the municipality for various designations from we're, as has been mentioned earlier, we're just going through the budget process right now in our multi-year budget. So I'm just trying to understand what the financial implications are for the various properties. This is the second long list we've now received from Latch, and I'm trying to get a better sense of that. And then secondly, the process if a resident who happened to own one of these properties said, I don't think so, prefer not to. Can you just explain both those points, please?
Mr. Gagnon?
Sure, and I'll do my best to answer those. And please let me know if I'm not hitting the mark on the questions. With regards to the second question that was answered about owners not wishing to be heritage designated, my first suggestion is always to make sure that a prospective purchaser knows the status of a property prior to acquiring it or even making an offer on it. So we've done a lot of work to make sure that the Register of Heritage Resources is updated, and that's available on the city's website, even through the changes to the website, and is also mapped on the city map application. The heritage planners respond to realtor inquiries almost on a daily basis to try to provide and share this information. And on an annual basis, staff do send out a postcard to all of the heritage property owners, usually during Heritage Week, as just a friendly reminder about obtaining approvals prior to making any changes to heritage designated properties. And then regards to your first question about financial responsibilities, the information that's been provided to the city by the province or national bodies suggests that there isn't any additional costs in terms of owning a heritage property. Each of the heritage properties identified has different heritage attributes that help to make these properties significant and warrant conservation and protection for future generations. And as that does change from property to property, it can be challenging to make any sort of general statements. Some properties may have very ornate plaster molding details that require specialized conservation treatment, whereas many other properties can benefit from just a good old-fashioned coat of paint from time to time.
So thank you, and I appreciate that. So Chair, through you, just clarity for my purpose, are there any designations, I'm talking about brand new ones, I'm not talking about existing designations where let the buyer beware or be aware, where a designation can be made without the owner's approval? Can it be made without their support if it doesn't exist currently?
Mr. Gagnon.
And through the chair, owner consent is not required for designations pursuant to the Ontario Heritage Act. That matter has been tested through Superior Court in Tremblay v. Lakeshore. There is an appeal route through currently through the Conservation Review Board, where a property owner may appeal a designation pursuant to the Ontario Heritage Act. with the changes to Bill 108, we will see that the elimination of the Conservation Review Board and the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal will henceforth hear objections to notice of intent to designate from council.
I appreciate that. And did you say that there's no financial implication to a municipality for any designation on a property? Did I hear you say that, please?
And through the chair, this is maybe where I'll need to rely on Greg Barrett to provide some more information. It's a very nuanced question, I'm thinking.
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. To the chair, there are no direct financial obligations on the city that I'm aware of as a result of designation. The city has programs that the city funds that provide for things such as upgrades. We have some of our upgrade programs are richer for designated properties, but that's sort of a choice that the city has made to support those. There are minimal costs associated with the actual process of designating that are part of our operating budget, such as the registering of the bylaw, the placking of the property, those kinds of things. So those are the municipal costs right now associated with designation. But beyond that, there aren't costs that accrue to the municipality by having designated buildings.
So if I can, through your chair to Mr. Barrett, I appreciate that there may not be designated costs, but there are certain financial benefits based on improvements that an individual as a result of a heritage property, if approved, can go through. So there are costs of approval because an owner of a property can't just say, I think I'll paint my heritage property pink. If that doesn't work, well, let's just leave it at that. So there has to be, I would think, a review process, and then the financial cost, budgeted or otherwise, but it's real money, that we would use to support certain improvements to properties, if I've got a sense of that. And I've just noticed that in the last month, we've had a fairly significant number of homes that have been approved. I'm just trying to get a financial sense of what the implication of that could be. And maybe that's how high is up is the answer, but can you shed any light, Mr. Barrett, to help understand that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe actually, well, that's another matter. So the long list of properties are not designated. That long list of properties that's coming forward, which is another part of tonight's recommendation, is a list of properties that are being recommended to be added to the register. So those are properties that that would be added to the register that would be believed to be of historical heritage value or merit. The initial, or what that means to a property that shows up on the inventory, is that if an application was made to demolish a property that's on the register, it means that within a certain period of time, council must make a decision as to whether or not the property is worthy of designation. And if council deems it to be worthy of designation, then it would stay the demolition. If council doesn't deem it to be worthy of designation, then the property can be demolished. So that's what the effect is of putting these properties on the register. There's not a financial implication. The financial implications that the mayor speaks to regarding the process for alterations would be related to designated properties. So not all of the properties that are on this long list would end up becoming designated. These are properties that are deemed to be of interest.
Actually, that's a really helpful distinction, and I appreciate that, Mr. Barrett. So when a property, and I'll end with this, Chair, I'm not trying to monopolize this piece here, just trying to increase my understanding of the designation process. You've got the registry, which is the long list that we see in front of us, provided by Latch. And can I presume first that you can't get on the designation list unless you're on the registry as starting point? Would that be a yes or no, Mr. Barrett?
That's a no. You don't need to be on the register to end up being designated. The register is a way that it's another way the city looks to flag properties that may be of value or interest, but it's not a required step to designation.
Okay, do you know what? I don't want to monopolize more time on this. We're going to have an offline just so I have some better clarity around this. That'd be helpful. But I really did appreciate Mr. Barrett, Mr. Gagno's comments on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments or questions on this? It's been moved and seconded. Oh, okay. I will call the vote on that.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so that takes care of our public agenda. And if there are no added items, then I will look for a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Hopkins and seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call the vote.
I vote yes.
Councillor Hopkins?
I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.